President Biden is vowing to stand by Ukraine for, quote, as long as it takes.
That's right. On the last day of the NATO summit, the president announced plans to send an additional $800 million in security assistance to the country. That package will be formally announced by the White House in the coming days. It is expected to include air defense systems, artillery, and ammunition, along with other offensive-type weaponry. The president says the U.S. is doing exactly what he had promised by sending Kyiv the support it needs and rallying the world to stand with Ukraine.
Before the war started, I told Putin that if he invaded Ukraine, NATO would not only get stronger, but would get more united. And he would see democracies in the world stand up and oppose his aggression and defend the rules-based order. And that's exactly what we're seeing today. This summit was about strengthening our alliance, meeting the challenges of our world as it is today, and the threats we're going to face in the future.
Let's bring in CBS News political contributor and White House reporter for the Associated Press, Zeke Miller, for more on this. Hi there, Zeke. Good to see you. So NATO has drafted a statement dubbing Russia a threat and China, as I understand it, a challenge to the world's democracies. During his speech, President Biden noted the last time the alliance updated its strategic concept was 12 years ago. And at the time, Russia was a partner and China wasn't even mentioned. How will this change NATO's approach to both countries moving forward?
This is formalizing some of what's already been underway, both at NATO and broadly in the transatlantic alliance. Certainly when it comes to Russia, there's really pre-February 24th and post-February 24th of 2022 in recent years. And that language is definitely going to be there because that's how the United States, NATO broadly, and the rest of Europe are treating Russia right now as really a threat, if not their number one threat, to immediate threat to their alliance and to European security. When it comes to China, that's a longer-term effort that we've seen on the part of both President Biden and his two predecessors, really, to sort of refocus the NATO alliance on China and treat it as a challenge and recognizing China's actions, whether economically or militarily, or could pose a threat or challenge to NATO and peace and security in the North Atlantic and beyond. And so that's why I was putting it there. The real question will be on the follow-through. Right now, there's certainly a lot of consensus around both of those ideas, particularly the Russia threat. China, there's always a few more divisions, and we've seen that in recent years over Chinese imports, Huawei and 5G technology. But will this change that perspective on the part of those NATO allies? That's certainly going to be a priority of the Biden administration coming out of this summit.
And Zeke, speaking of that Russia threat, Mr. Biden announced the U.S. would be sending an additional $800 million worth of security assistance to Ukraine. What more do we know about what is in this package? What is it expected to include in terms of military hardware?
So we've got a decent sense of what's in this package right now. One of them is a mid to long range air defense system produced by a Norwegian company in Raytheon. It's actually a very similar system to the one that's used in Washington to protect the nation's capital. That could be used to protect Kyiv or other Ukrainian population centers, potentially, or just at least put a counter threat of Russia's military aircraft in that fight in the country's east. There's going to be additional counter artillery radars that could help Ukraine's fighters on that borderline try to detect where Russian artillery is coming from, so they can counterfire, as well as badly needed ammunition. Just for the Ukrainian armed forces, so they can try to keep pace to the best they can against the better armed and certainly the Russian military that also has shorter supply lines. These aren't round. The Russians can drive just a few miles across the border to the front lines in some cases. These are rounds that are either being shipped from the United States or other parts of Europe that have to find their way into an active war zone. So they take some time, and those logistical challenges are what they're trying to compensate for here.
Mm-hmm. Zeke, on domestic issues, President Biden says he would support changing the filibuster rule in order for Congress to codify Roe v. Wade into law. How significant is that development?
So this is really the first time that we've heard from President Biden on that, saying that he would support that. He's obviously somebody who's called himself an institutionalist, somebody very protective of the Senate and its traditions, and opposed this sort of move for other issues. The challenge facing President Biden here is that he doesn't have the votes, and that's always been the case. Previously, when it came to voting rights, the president said he didn't, in some ways, feel the need to weigh in because it was a moot point. Democrats didn't have the votes. Now, as we are, 5 or so months out from the 4 months out, really, from the midterm elections, the president is saying, essentially talking to Democratic voters, I would support this if you give me enough votes in the Senate to do it. He's turning into a midterm election message. Practically, in the short term, this isn't going to happen. Democrats don't have the votes to do it, but the president's trying to motivate voters and particularly his base who are angered by the Supreme Court decision last week to come out and vote and do something about it. And then this sort of gives them the green light to sort of draw a connection between what he wants their vote to be and then what he'll say he'll do about it.
Yeah, it's interesting, as you know, that he has resisted this position, taking this position before. So certainly significant to hear that from the president now. Zeke Miller, Zeke, always good to have you. Thank you.